The days are getting shorter, the cold weather is rolling in, so it's time to find out whether one of my favourite supermarket dark beers is still really worth it. Hello and welcome back to the channel, and yes, winter is almost well and truly here. It certainly feels like it's here if you go and stand outside right now, and as a result I am very much in the mood for a dark beer, and I thought what better time to find out whether one that I've raved about for years, Thornbridge's Cocoa Wonderland, is still worth your time and effort here today in the winter of 2023. Rather surprisingly, Thornbridge's Cocoa Wonderland has been available in the UK supermarkets pretty much non-stop for several years now, and the reason I say that is surprising is because, well, it doesn't really fit any of the conventions of a supermarket craft beer. First off, it's a porter, describes itself as a porter, which, well, is not all that trendy in craft beer circles even still. There are some incredible craft brewers putting out fantastic porters, but in general, you don't see people hyping about them all that much. And then this one is a bit of an anomaly in the fact that it's a porter at 6.8%. Add on to the fact it's from Thornbridge, who, well, they're very good craft beer producers, but they kind of ride that line between trad and craft pretty consistently. And effectively, this is a relatively cheap beer. I know in Morrison's it's on their multi-buy discount deal. I'll be honest, I bought it on that, and as a result can't actually remember the singular price, but I'll pop it on screen now while I'm editing it, just to let you know what the per can cost is in the UK at this point. But I say it's relatively inexpensive, especially for the fact that it's a higher ABV beer, and, well, in the times we're living in, higher ABV beers, generally speaking, are a lot more pricey. So it's a win-win all round. I was slightly concerned when this caught my eye in the supermarket because it had changed, it was different, and I looked at it going, oh no, they haven't had. They full well expecting that they'd drop the ABV on it, but not the case. All that has changed from the exterior, at least, is that, well, this is no longer a 330ml portion, and you get the full 440 for, I'm not going to say the same price because it probably has changed, but still a very good deal. In its first incantation, this appeared as a 330ml bottle, then as a 330ml can, and now we sit here today with a 440ml can, which I can only assume means next year we'll get a 500ml bottle if we cross all of our fingers. But to be honest, at 6.8%, you probably don't really need the extra anyway, but it is just a nice to have. And to be honest, as I alluded to in the intro, this is one of my favourite supermarket dark beers. Now, I am a little bit of a dark beer purist at times. I would have preferred a big, rich porter without an additive, but nonetheless, this is described as a chocolate porter at 6.8%. And yeah, okay, whilst I would have preferred something a bit adjunct-less, chocolate and porter go together hand in hand absolutely very well. So before we break into it and find out whether it's still worth it in today's age, here's a quick look at the can. They've not really, oh, nearly dropped it. They've not really changed the design much, other than the fact that the can's got bigger. It's still very much this style. It looks very nice indeed. Thornbridge being the size they are now, a load of export info on the back there in many different languages. But yeah, it's just I don't know, it just ticks all the boxes on a visual for me. I do think it looks very nice indeed. Pouring nice and dark as you'd expect, maybe a little thin, but let's be honest, this is a supermarket beer. Slightly lively on the pour. I have to say there is a little bit left in the can. It was just a little bit too vigorous, but not a bad start by any means. If I pulled it up to the light, to say it looked a bit thin and potentially splashy as I was pouring it, absolutely no light bleeding through there whatsoever. I am kind of intrigued as to why they called this a porter and not a stout. Let's be honest, the lines are blurred in terms of a definition these days, but given that it is just that bit darker, that bit richer, I mean, I've seen porters go out at basically ruby red, so, you know, I feel like a stout might have sold better, but anyway, I don't care. It is looking absolutely fantastic. It's got a nice, big, thick, pillowy, almost caramel coloured foam head on it. You see that? It looks the business, and I have to say, as I opened it, as I poured it in, the room became filled with this nice, sweet, chocolatey aroma that just took me back and go, you know what, that is exactly what I remember from before which is, well, it's a good sign, to be honest. It is indeed a very good sign. The aromas, though, in full, they're bold, sweet, vanilla. I can't actually remember offhand if this is a lactose beer, but it does have a bit of that slightly, well, milky sweetness that you do get from some lactose beers. And take a big breath in and you do start to find some of those nice chocolatey notes. It's very full-bodied chocolate. It definitely starts off very sweet. You almost get through to some slightly bitter, almost coffee notes, but it cuts just a little bit short. But yeah, it's a good, properly rounded chocolate note in there. It smells very appealing. Not too much more to talk about on the aroma, but can I just say how good it still looks? Normally, stronger ABV dark beers, pour them in, have a few kind of, you know, get your nose in there for a bit, and the head just disappears. This one is still very much sitting around. So before we pour the rest of it in, we are going to take a sip. So cheers. Happy dark beer season. Oh yeah, that is a big wintry hug in a glass. Now, I am going to top it up just to make sure we're getting the full experience here. Now, I have covered quite a lot of Thornbridge beer recently. I'm not really sure why that is. It's all been supermarket purchases. I think, to be honest, I'm just kind of losing a bit of interest in a lot of the other stuff that is in supermarkets, and in general, Thornbridge put stuff together pretty well. I did complain on my previous review of a Thornbridge beer, which was the Lord Marple's Bitter, that, to be honest, the conditioning was just a bit washy, and overall it should have just been a bit more impressive. The conditioning on this, to say it's from a can, is absolutely supreme. It really is all there. The mouthfeel is very good. I did say it looked a bit thin though, so let's just address that. One of the few beers that, although if you were to measure it in a some sort of, you know, measure the density of the beer, it probably does still come across relatively thin and comparable to a lot of other supermarket dark beers. But there's something about the mouthfeel on this that just ticks the box. It's really fluid, slick, but it's not cloying, it's not sticky. There's a tiny bit of carbonation in there, but really just enough to keep everything moving around. Not so much that it actually feels fizzy at all. It's one of those that, well, to be honest, it's not going to gas you up. It's going to leave you with this, yeah, I don't know. It's just, I'm hesitant to say it's perfect, but the conditioning really is absolutely very, very good indeed. Right then, top to bottom taste test time, but I think you can probably tell already we're getting towards the, yeah, it's still worth buying. Like, I can't get away from it. I can't pretend and leave you on a cliffhanger. It's still absolutely excellent. If anything, I feel like it might have gotten better, which is not something I can say about a lot of beers these days. So initially, right on the tip of the tongue, very little carbonation, as already discussed. Very sweet, but mildly sweet. And as you leave it there lingering, you start to get a little bit of nice, big, roasty bitterness starting to filter in. As you drink this normally, you're never going to actually experience that, but it is there, which is just nice to know. Onto the first full third of the tongue then. Very mild chocolatey notes, bit of vanilla. The bitterness doesn't properly come in, but there's this extra note. It's slightly savoury. It's a balancing thing, really. It's making it not too sweet, too instant, too one-sided. And whilst I don't believe this is intentional, and I think if you hadn't had any of these beers with it in, you wouldn't necessarily notice it, but sometimes when you get kind of nuts, peanuts in big, dark, impy stouts, they leave this slightly, well, it's almost like a cartoon version of themselves. It's over-amped up, it's over-egged, it's done OTT. In this, it feels like there's the start of that slightly savoury, nutty note, but it never gets any further. Almost kind of a nuttiness you might even get out of a slightly exotic coffee sits there, as I say, right on that first third of the tongue, along with those chocolatey notes, making something truly very nicely balanced indeed. Then onto the mid palate. As with most beers, it doesn't really intensify at this point. You start to get a little bit washy, but interestingly, this does change. That chocolate becomes a bit more rich, a bit more dark, a bit more bitter. You do start to get some genuinely true coffee notes coming in, as you do with a lot of darker beer. And if you really dig around for it, there is even a tip of the hat for some of those kind of dark fruit, licorice style kind of stout and porter notes as well. Again, they're just kind of secondary to that chocolatey experience, but they are there, and again, just help with that key balancing act onto the back of the tongue. Then all of those bits from the rest of the experience kind of come in and fuse together to leave like a, I guess like a singular chocolate experience. Think of like maybe a praline chocolate that's got a bit more nut in it. It's not too sweet, but it's like insanely chocolatey all at the same time. It's that kind of experience. There's a bit of bitterness, there's a bit of sweetness, and it all just dances in. Again, I don't want to say the word perfection, but well, it's very, very good indeed. And then on the aftertaste, dark roast malt bitterness kicks back in a little bit. You're still left with a nice chocolatey aftertaste, but a bit of that dark malt comes back in just to make sure that the experience you've had hasn't just left you with a nasty sweet kind of sensation and just, you know, kind of lingered. It cuts the palate clean, makes you in essence just ready to go back in for another swig, which is always the key sign of a fantastic beer. So what's wrong with it? Well, this is where we're going to struggle, and I'm going to try and explain to you why this might not be for everyone, but I absolutely adore it. You need to keep in mind that a dark beer with minimal carbonation, good mouthfeel, generally sweet, but with a huge amount of balancing bitterness is effectively the perfect beer for me. That is like everything I absolutely adore. If you took the bitterness out of this, it'd be a sweet, horrible mess. And to be honest, it's one of my biggest complaints about a lot of adjunct stouts and porters these days. But this just happens to bring it back down to earth, back down into that absolute kind of just brilliant balance. Balance is the word all the way through. And being 6.8%, that's kind of my favourite for a dark, boozy beer. That kind of 6 to 7% region is where I feel like I get the most out of having an amped up ABV. As soon as we go beyond that, it almost becomes too much about the ABV and then trying to mask it, whereas this just has this nice balancing act. It's warming, I can feel my cheeks going. It's a fantastic winter beer. And yeah, for the price that you pay for this in a supermarket, it really does beg a lot of questions about what everyone else is doing, because it is just, for me, if you'd like that style, absolutely brilliant. Right then, just before we wrap this up, I will take a quick look at the can. On the front of it, it says Thornbridge since 2005, Cocoa Wonderland Chocolate Porter, 6.8%, contains lactose. So, yeah, there we go. I wasn't wrong. Got it much more on the nose, really, interestingly, than actually on the palate, but it is what it is. And then on the back, it says, the winner of a large number of accolades in the UK and internationally, Cocoa Wonderland is an absolute go-to for many Thornbridge drinkers. It has been created as a porter first, balanced and sturdy with a light roastiness and distinct touch of mocha and raisin. Interesting. The raisin for me coming a bit more across as kind of, I guess, mild licorice, but very much the same wheelhouse when it comes to beer notes. It says this foundation allows the intense and luxurious cocoa flavours to truly stand out without overpowering the beer itself. The decadent chocolate notes are present from the first scent to the last drop. You know what? They're not wrong. It has actually got a load of, let me show you the can there. It's got a load of little icons, if you can see that, to give you a little descriptor. And they say it's a serve at 8 to 10 degrees. Or is that 6 to 10? Yeah, 6 to 10 degrees. Not the easiest to read this. Happy to say that this has definitely not been served too cold, as I may have been guilty of in a couple of recent reviews. I made sure it was up to temp, and it's probably sat between 8 and 10, so pretty happy with that. It's magnum hopped, not that they played a massive role other than a little bit of bitterness. It's dark, the aroma is coffee and chocolate, the taste is creamy and caramel, and then the, I don't know what that end one is, but it says tiramisu, which is not a bad description actually. Boozy, chocolate, bit of coffee, yeah. They could have called this a tiramisu porter, but I think that would have been doing it a disservice, because it's not as big and brash as that. It's something more considered, a little bit more reserved, and as a result, well, all the more enjoyable from my point of view anyway. Have you tried this recently? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know what you thought of it. And yeah, are there any other supermarket dark beer classics I should be reviewing this time of year? Also let me know in the comments below. But that really is everything. It absolutely is still worth buying, and I for one will be getting in a few more. But until next time, that is everything. So as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like it. If you haven't already, subscribe if you would be so kind, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.